Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Ethics Experts. If it's your first time joining us, welcome. And if you're a returning subscriber, hey, bestie, the world's a better place because you're in it. You see what happens when you subscribe, you get a bonus greeting on every episode. On this episode, we talked to the one and only Bill Ryan, Chief Compliance Officer at AT&T. Bill has a really cool story, and you'll see a really interesting sort of through line as we talk through his various experiences of putting other people first, success being not the dollars in the bank account or the title that you achieve, but rather the impact you have on those around you. I hope you find this episode to be as inspirational to you as it was to me. Hope you enjoy.
Welcome to the Ethics Experts, where we're elevating ethics and compliance and HR to the strategic level it's supposed to be.
Hey, Bill.
Hey, Nick. How you doing?
Good. How you doing? What's happening?
It's Friday. That's good. That's my list of good things happening. So
very good.
Stop at Friday. No, that's right. How are you doing?
Something. At least there's some silver lining there. Been excited to get you on the Ethics Experts, man. I'm glad we're able to
appreciate
to connect on that. So
sure.
let's kind of jump right in. I think you have a really interesting background. You have some really cool stories that kind of turned you into the compliance officer you are today. But I always like to kind of start at the beginning. What was it like for you growing up? What kind of a kid were you? And how did that sort of set you on the path that you're on?
Yeah, no, it's thanks, Nick, for the opportunity to be on today. I grew up in a family of educators and attorneys, and it was work hard in the service of other people. And so there were some really good values that success was not limited to your individual impact. It was, when you had the right results for other people, that was really the most fulfilling kind of professional outcome. And I think that's been the common thread throughout my career journey, is that idea that work hard, have success individually, but when you can better someone else's experience or position, that is when, you've really fulfilled yourself, and success can come with that. So those were kind of some of the values that I was fortunate enough to be around growing up. So
at what point in your life did you notice that was like a different sort of value set than other people may have had? Because whenever I ask this question, people end up talking about things that have made an impact on them, or were sort of unique to their experience, right? Like to that culture that they grew up in. Can you think of a time or like a point where you realized that oh man, people have like a different philosophy on what success looks like, or where that prioritization of putting others kind of above self is,
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's something I haven't thought about in a long time. But I was actually in a philosophy class. I went to Georgetown University, and there I got in a very polite but fairly strenuous debate with a philosophy professor. His instinct at the time, or his kind of theory, was that everyone in every choice is self-interested. And I remember challenging that. And I remember saying, I'm not sure I totally agree. I think we derive benefit from a lot of our decisions, but I think I've been exposed to people growing up that they genuinely, their first instinct is, how can I better the position of people around me? Now that they may bring them some residual benefit, and maybe that's the element of self-interest. But we actually went back and forth for a long time, and he ended up being the person writing my recommendations for law schools and future employment, because he enjoyed the dialogue around this idea of, you can lead, you can be a professional, you can execute, you can operate at a high level, but consistently mindful of the impact you have around others, and not necessarily be dominated by the self-interest. And that was really kind of, something I felt in that moment. I was super grateful to the people, my parents in particular, of instilling that in me. And again, so at that moment, I look back at that conversation as one of these insightful moments of how I compared to other people.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. It's like, sometimes like a value that's been like embedded in you or whatever, you don't know that that's like a unique value until somebody kind of presents I don't know, like a counterclaim that like creates some dissonance with it or something. You know what I mean?
Completely. No, that's right. And again, it was neat to occur in a philosophy class of all times, because it wasn't, both have complete merit and complete value, but they're distinct. They're very, very different. There's nothing wrong with self-interest as a predominant motivation, but it is a different way to think about things. If and there's some negatives about thinking about the impact of other people in front of self-interest. They're relatively, I wouldn't put one's better than the other. They're just very distinct ways to operate and make decisions.
There's this Keynes quote That's kind of interesting. He's, I am a capitalist for sure. But the way he put this, and, he was a, very famous economist, and I'm going to totally butcher the quote, but he said that like capitalism is the system where, a bunch of evil, self-interested people in pursuit of their own self-interest magically creates like more good. You know what I mean? It's
Right,
kind of it's kind of like a contradictory thing. So how did you, so you grew up, were probably not thinking about compliance when you were younger. Talk to me a little bit about like your path. You went through undergrad, you went to law school. What set you on that path through law school and all that?
Yeah, it's a little bit circuitous. When I was in college, I was studying international relations and really intrigued by international law, government structure, how people and countries interact, how does governments define legitimate structures, why do they transition? I did a lot of work on transition of different governments into democracy, with failed democracy or successful democracy. And I was genuinely interested in a career in that space. And it was just happenstance that as I was graduating, the year I graduated, there was not a foreign service exam being offered. And it was the first time in a long time that a foreign service exam wasn't being offered by our government. And that was a career path a lot of people within this school and this program took. And when I learned of that, I started to think about, okay, how can I bring professional fulfillment? How can I do something that's consistent with the things I've learned? And I made the choice to apply to a program at the time known as Teach for America. And effectively what they did was they helped us achieve emergency teaching credentials. And I got placed at a first grade classroom in Oakland, California to teach a bilingual classroom. It wasn't completely associated, but it just felt like the right time. And again, going back to the things that I had seen, it felt like, hey, this is a really cool time to give back. I like the challenge of it. I like the challenge of a bilingual classroom. I like the idea of being in a different location. So I decided to pursue that.
What did you think you were going to, like, what professional fulfillment did you think you were going to, like, you were kind of singularly focused on this certain track, and like that test, again, I don't know that much about it, but that test wasn't being offered. So it seemed like that door closed. What did you think you were going to get on that track from a professional fulfillment perspective?
I thought I was going to have a massive impact on public education, and it was naive. It was a naive. It was a good view, it was a well-intentioned view, but it was a pretty, now with 30 plus years of hindsight, it was a pretty naive view in terms of what I thought could go in and help more systemically, could I make a change? And I think not until I got in the classroom and realized you can't even get close to the systemic progress until you make individual progress at the classroom level. You have 6-year-olds who walk in every day and you're one of the most important peoples in their lives. You got to put all your energy and heart and professionalism into that before you even start thinking about broader systemic issues. So I thought maybe, there was a lot of narratives. There was a really famous book at the time called Savage Inequalities. It was talking about the inequalities in our educational system. And I was attracted to that idea of saying, can we make systemic change? Can we make systemic progress? The reality was it became much more of a tactical, can I teach 6-year-olds to read and put them in the best position academically for their future success?
Was there like some disappointment in that? Like, or maybe answered a different way, how did you prevent that like perspective shift from like jading you or like?
Yeah, no, it was the exact opposite. It was, you have these moments and you realize how maybe, sheltered or limited your worldview is of kind of how you define an issue. And it was really awakening, right? And actually it was this process where up until that point in my life, you probably could be really successful, but still be pretty selfish, right? You can be very successful academically in a college setting by focusing on your own knowledge and writing and communication skills. Here, success wasn't defined by my progress. It was defined by the progress of 27 6-year-olds. And so it was this idea of like, forget about the systemic issues for now. You have people that are relying upon you at this moment to help them get in the best position. So it was energizing in the sense of like, okay, let's focus on a real specific issue that's really important, develop connections with these kids, make them successful. And then hopefully at some point, maybe that translates into something else. But I owe it to this group of students, these 6-year-olds, to do the best. Like they deserved everything I had every single day. So it was a real maturation process, and it's stayed with me ever since. As before you get to the systemic issues, you really got to make sure you have the right level of connection with the people that are directly expecting you to be their leader, to be their educator. to give them direction.
Yeah, it's like you kind of thought the game was like, okay, we have to fix these structures, and it's like now the battleground is sort of at that individual level, and with respect to like where that impact could greatest be felt, it can be on that sort of human, not on on that human basis, not on the sort of the lattice work that is whatever systemic structure that like is going to be perhaps immovable or like futile to even try to attack or something. And there's an interesting kind of like loop back to that. You were talking about those values that you were kind of raised with. It was kind of a confirmation of that in a way of serving others and like helping others and like the not just the sort of selfish self-interest like fulfillment you get from that, but from to the extent that helps to like leave the world better and actually make a difference.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. That was completely my experience, is that defining success and impact is a multi-layered, complex issue. And for a long time, maybe we define it as true systemic, institutional level change. There are lots of gradations of that, right? There's different layers, and you don't know the impact you're going to have eventually or indirectly for some time. And so if you really kind of put this challenge in front of you, direct it with your energy. And that's what I did in this instance, is I kind of blocked out everything else and just said, success is if I get these kids up to grade level. They weren't at grade level. If I can get them up to grade level, both in Spanish and English at the end of 9 months, that changes the dynamic for every single one of them.
Totally.
Right? It puts them in a different trajectory. So it's really about redefining what success looks like. And then, that had to be the prioritization in terms of success. And then if there are residual opportunities, okay, I'll get to that. Sure. But let's just execute. Let's execute really, really well. And that's what I did. I mean, I brought energy and I tried to bring sophistication, organization, like it was any other job in the entire world. And I remember people would ask and they'd be like, "Oh, that's nice. You're a teacher." And I was like, "It's not nice. It's a super intellectually, professionally demanding job. Like, come in with organization and skill sets, and you have very specific KPIs." And I mean, I don't want to over dramatize it. I have such
it's not a job you can just sort of like phone in. No. I mean, to your point, you're influencing a bunch of different people, and these people have different personalities, and they're at different levels, and you're measured in an objective way. It's not there's a lot more sort of dimensionality to that role than I think somebody from the outside might think. They might just think it's like, oh, how sweet that you do that. Right. It's like, no, this is like a battleground or something,
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And that's, I have such profound respect for teachers that approach it with this way. And it really is, it's incredible the impact they have. We don't do nearly enough recognition of how significant good teaching is in our society. So that was my experience. It was awesome. It was incredibly life shifting and priority shifting.
I was talking to a guy a couple weeks ago who is in the education space, and he does some really cool work with, he has this, he's part of this company, and they have, I'm going to kind of butcher this, but, in many cases, like education is sort of one size fits all, and we all just kind of get advanced through it. You get it, you learn multiplication tables, and then the next quarter you're learning fractions and so forth. And there's not enough attention. It's too big of a room to give the individual attention for folks. So sometimes kids will get like really kind of left behind. And he was kind of talking about some of these studies, and I kind of liken it to the slope of a line, or like where the trajectory of a line is greatly influenced by like that slope at its origin. And if someone doesn't get that attention, or they don't build those skills, then it can create these sort of self-fulfilling prophecies. If you think that you're not good at reading, or you think you're not good at math, well, then you're going to kind of sort of steer away from things that are heavy in reading or heavy in math. And it literally can set your life on like this totally different place that you otherwise could go, That resonates with me so much. It was so true, so clearly. Even at that age, you could see the level of kind of trust, how important trust was, that they trusted you and you trusted them, and the level of confidence you had in them. And you set goals based upon what you believe were achievable objectives, not kind of based on the circumstance. Right. If you were defining circumstantial goals, you probably wouldn't have pushed as hard, and I wouldn't push myself as hard. But so like that idea. And again, learning from some teachers who were exceptionally effective. I was 22 years old and really just doing the best I could. You saw that the standards and the expectations, regardless of kind of the broader dynamics, were just, this is where we're going to go, because I know you can get there. So it was a really great experience. I always tell this story that
you realize it's a dangerous impact in the best way. I still had a pretty heavy Boston accent at the time. I grew up in Boston, and most of my students spoke Spanish as a native language. So we were instructing in Spanish and English. We were transitioning to English. And I discovered if I wasn't careful, my students would start, saying English words with a Boston accent. They wrote one day on a Monday, they would talk about having gone to a birthday party, and they wrote P-A-T-Y. And so I remember very vividly this moment of me being in front of the class, really frustrated and saying, hey, there's an R in potty. And everyone looked at me like I was nuts. And it was just one of these things that you're like, they're going to say potty for the rest of their life if you're not really mindful of these things. So there was mutuality in learning in terms of like creation of self-awareness, in terms of creation of what the right goal setting should look like. And again, it's not a Hollywood movie. Like, there are really hard days, there are really good days. There's a lot of days where I was good. There are a lot of days I was bad, but some core lessons in terms of just kind of understanding, setting goals, working in the service of others, trying to improve others' situation and put them in a better position. There's no doubt that that's been like key foundational elements to future professional opportunities.
Man, it's so interesting. I mean, so many kind of like monumental or like core value confirmations that, I'm sure you've carried throughout the rest of your career. Like, they set their watch by you, and they literally emulate you as the leader of that room, and they're going to copy you. I mean, even down to like how a word is pronounced. There's like a whole metaphor in that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's a super insightful thing. And I always say, and again, I'm not always good at setting context in moments, but I take a lot of pride in kind of being able to take a breath in very stressful, what exists now, or what are stressful moments, and just think back to that experience again, 30 years ago now, of just kind of say like, okay, there's hard, and then there's hard, and there's challenges, and there's challenges. And that kind of resetting contextually of, okay, is this a really hard moment, or is it just complex? And there's a difference. Like, is this something that you should feel a lot of stress and worry and get frustrated, or is this just a complex problem that requires a certain effort? And just seeing the situation of these kids and their families working really, really hard to create opportunity. It's been a good, broader kind of ethical, moral grounding as well, of just saying, there's a difference between hard and complex, right? And to me, that's been a key lesson. And that in a moment, when you can take a breath and just say, I'm not sure that's hard. It's very, very complex. For me, those are two different things, right? Just in terms of emotionally how you present it. Complex, you go say, okay, we got to bring the right skill set, solve it. Hard, you're like, oh gosh, this is going to be hard. I'm not sure if I can do it. I got to back away. Do I go around it? When you can contextualize those things in the moment, I think that's been one of the other key lessons I took from that experience.
I mean, it's so cool when, you had this sort of desire for this experience, and you thought it would give you something, and I'm sure it gave you all those things, but it also gave you these, these layers of other things, these other perspectives that you've, clearly, whatever you called it, I don't know, that sort of like ethical framework, or this perspective that you can reference back again to keep whatever you're facing, whatever impediment is in your way, in the right perspective. So how did you know it was time to move on from that? What was that like, and what did you go to next?
Yeah. When I had started teaching, I had the really great opportunity to have dinner with the founder of Teach for America. It's a woman by the name of Wendy Kopp, who has this amazing legacy of this organization she's created. And there was a dinner in Los Angeles, and I remember sitting down with this group of people, and it was recent alumni. The program was only a few years old at the time. But I expected to come in and meet everybody, and they said, come meet some of the recent alumni and get their insights. And I expected to come in and see a group of master teachers. And it was different than that. There were master teachers, but there were also people influencing education advocacy at different ways. There was a doctor who was doing underserviced areas and talking about education. There was a principal, there was a lawyer, there was a government official. And it was really this diversity of impact of saying, imagine how we can change the way people view education if we approach it from a multilateral way. If we just, again, the deepest level of respect for people who are teaching and doing so effectively. But to make real institutional change, we probably need lots of advocates in different areas. And there was some personal situation at the time that just kind of compiled with that. And so I said, it was hard to leave teaching, but I said, okay, I'm going to stay true to my initial commitment to try to make a difference and advocate for more consistent approaches to education, but I'm going to find a different field to do it. And at the time that's when I decided to look at law schools.
Okay. So, what was that like? and how did you think you were going to leverage law school to like achieve this desire? Because, in that room, I'm just kind of picturing all these different kind of diverse people that have this sort of shared passion for teaching and the value that education can play in the lives of, kids and,
Right.
our country. What was that like going to law school, and how was that going to be a springboard into what you wanted to do?
Yeah. So there was a very specific issue at the time that kind of intersected with this decision-making process. At the time, there was an initiative in California, and it was known as the UNS initiative, and it was designed to abolish the use of second languages in the classrooms. And there's a fair debate about the right pedagogical approach to instruction. And I didn't necessarily have, personally, I probably had, based on my experience, I saw benefit to the use of being able to be bilingual and help students kind of transition. There was no doubt our shared goal was to get everyone to be proficient in English eventually. But what I didn't like about the initiative and the way it was introduced was it was introduced by an individual who had limited experience in school systems and seeing
Gotcha.
how the teachers were kind of using it, right? It wasn't to cover up or distract from the ultimate goals. In my mind,
it was a means to get there or something.
It was a means, right? It was a really effective tool that, if you don't speak a word of English when you're coming into a classroom, it's really hard to solely use English to teach math and history and science, right? If I had the capability, if it's something that I was able to do in both languages, again, with the ultimate goal, trying to get people proficient in English, it felt like a really good tool. But put that aside, right? There's lots of good theories. People have studied it a
Sure.
lot deeper than I have. I think what I didn't like was it didn't feel like the right way to shift such an important topic was by a referendum in California, not fully informed with multiple perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
And you become very, you recognize very clearly that there are different power pockets of kind of how do you influence educational systems. And unfortunately, we don't necessarily always rely on our teachers' perspective as what's best for students. There's political dynamics, societal dynamics.
Yeah.
And it didn't feel fully informed the process. So that's where I kind of said, listen, I've always been interested in the legal world. I looked at it pretty deeply when I was in college. This is a type of example where if there's more people advocating for a different lens, let's come to a better result. Whatever the right result is, let's just make sure that there's equal representation in different pockets of power to come to a good conclusion. And so that was something I was thinking at the time, just saying, if I go into law, that I'd be able to have a different discussion than if I was a teacher. And again, right or wrong, that didn't feel great to me, but if I had access and understood the law and understand better how referendum worked and how could I challenge that or input the process, the way the world works is I thought that would be a different way to influence it. Not better than being a teacher, not worse than being a teacher, just a different. And that went back to that dinner where I thought, okay, how do we influence positively education from lots of different fields? So that was really the direct intersection.
Again, interesting sort of tie back to, you said you grew up in a family of lawyers and teachers, I think is what you said.
That's right.
Or lawyers and educators. And, it's such a cool kind of intersection of it. What was surprising about law school?
At the time, the way I always characterize my law school experience is I was very selfish. I went back to saying, I'm putting an incredible amount of time and financial investment into this experience. What I had been coached by some, really thoughtful people was, if you do really well in law school, you're going to create a lot of future professional flexibility, right? If you get good grades, if you do a good job. So I'm not sure that I was surprised, but when I think about it, great people. I went to Boston College Law School, great school, really value-based school. But when I think about my experience there, was really about the intensity of taking advantage of what felt like a pretty significant luxury, right? Coming out of a school system and where we were kind of struggling to get the basics, it felt like, wow, if I should take advantage of this opportunity because this is incredible. You can change your position. I have certain privileges that if I do well on this, I probably create a lot of professional flexibility for myself. I better not miss that opportunity. So most of that law school experience was focused very intensely on, just trying to execute it and perform at a high level. I had the opportunity to intern at the U.S. Attorney's Office in Boston, see lawyering there. I interned at a Wall Street law firm, get complete different lawyering there. So it was really just kind of a professional evolution, personal evolution, take advantage of the opportunity as much as I could.
Yeah, I mean, from a distance, law seems like almost like monolithic, but to your point, there's all these different sort of styles, there's all these different approaches to it and all these, it's kind of like fighting or something. Like there's 100 different sort of styles of fighting, and you getting to see those different ones. What were some of the differences that you noticed that maybe kind of changed the direction that you ended up going between that internship at the U.S. attorney versus that Wall Street law firm? Were there any things that you're like, I definitely want to do this, or, oh man, this really resonated with me?
I was surprised at how much I went in thinking I would focus on litigation. I was working at Sullivan Cromwell. I had done it was my first year I worked at the U.S. attorney's office and the drug group and supporting some of those initiatives. I went to Sullivan and Cromwell thinking, okay, I'm going to focus on litigation. It felt like it matched up. It felt like there was a lot you'd be exposed to. And pretty early days, I was exposed to the M&A team, the corporate team that happened to be doing a lot of work in Latin America. And I really liked the dynamic of trying to build partnerships while advocating. Mm-hmm. And so some of these, some of them are complete. You have a winner and a loser and you try to win.
Totally.
But the great majority of JV partnership agreements, financings, even M&A, everyone wants to walk away from that experience feeling like we did the best we absolutely could for our client. But the other side walks away with a level of respect and trust. That is, to me, a good result. And I saw that element, and I really like that intellectual challenge of how can you be a really fierce advocate, yet at the same time build a relationships with a counterparty. And that can be intense and mad and frustrated at certain moments. But at the end of the day, they look across the table and say, I feel like this was a fair process. I'd go back to them. I would do that again with that same group of people. And so I actually shifted from a litigation approach to more of that idea of, the corporate transactional M&A, private equity type deal side, because I like the human relationship side of kind of that. It was a puzzle. It was a little bit of a puzzle of kind of how do you win for your client, yet also not necessarily make the other person feel like, gosh, I don't trust what just happened.
Yeah, because you got to create the circumstances for success for the next chapter that's starting, right? If you're acquiring a company, you want to get the best deal for your client, to your point, but also those two companies are now together, and that's the start of a new marriage, and that's a start of hopefully the platform for success or something.
Yeah, you said it better than I did. That's exactly right. It's very rare. There were obviously a few instances where it's a zero-sum game. And then the thing you learn very quickly is the pendulum of leverage. It shifts frequently. Yeah. And, when you take advantage of that too much in that moment,
totally.
Gosh, my experience is it feels like it always comes flying back, and it doesn't take very long. So that was kind of a shift, and I felt like a puzzle that I was really attracted to.
I used to be in private equity back in the day, and there was a guy I worked for where, like, if there were 10 points of negotiation, I mean, talk about a zero-sum game guy. If there were 10 points, we had to win all 10. It's like 3 of these don't really matter to us, but it's just like on principle. And it's just like, we have to like live with these folks after this deal is over. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And to your point, it has this sort of ripple effect, and it leaves it, when you're the acquiring company in particular, it can kind of set it on a bad path. They can have a bad taste in their mouth, or they can feel whatever, like, their face got rubbed in it or something. And it's like, you're cleaning that up for 2 years after it or something,
That's completely it. And I think that was a really educational moment in the sense of there were probably times we could win those last 3 points, and maybe we should, but there was a cost to winning those 3.
Totally.
Right. And the really thoughtful people would anticipate the cost of winning those 3. There's value in winning those 3 in that moment, but there's a long-term cost to the relationship, to their motivation, to the trust level, to when they have a leverage at a different dynamic. And that's where I said it became a little bit of this intellectual puzzle that the people that are really good at it would be, I'm okay yielding those 3, not because I don't want the fight or because I couldn't, but because I think that's actually the best result for everybody in the long term. So that was kind of anyways, that's what drew me unexpectedly to that area.
I always say, like, expertise in any field is knowing like what matters and what doesn't matter. And it's a very sort of base level approach to say, well, I'll just act like it all matters and I'm going to win every single point. Well, some of those points to what you just said, they don't actually matter in the longer term. We're just talking about one inning. We're not talking about all nine,
Right.
So you moved into big law. You're doing these kind of M&A type deals. Was that right?
That's correct. Yep. Both public and private equity. I was in New York at the New York office and in the Los Angeles office for Sullivan.
And so, we kind of touched on this a little bit, like what you talked about is, let's just call it, just for shorthand, like the human element as like a different dimension versus like the legal element of like, winning every single point. Do you feel like that, or how do you feel like that experience in that sort of chapter of your life has like influenced, what you do now?
Yeah. I mean, what was really interesting is, so right after I left Sullivan, I came into in-house, gosh, it's over 20 years ago now, to DIRECTV. And
Okay.
the role I was brought into at DIRECTV was negotiating the video agreements with the network providers for DIRECTV. So DIRECTV every couple of years would do an agreement with Disney and NBC Universal and Fox and HBO. And it was actually just all these things. It's exactly the NFL, notably. We had the NFL Sunday Ticket. And this was exactly what we were just talking about, because these relationships weren't 25-year deals. They weren't M&A transactions. These were license agreements that said you can show HBO on DIRECTV for the next 3 years. The intersection of that was, well, gosh, we're trying to grow. We're trying to be profitable. We're trying to be efficient.
Right.
We also know we're going to be back at the table with HBO 3 years from now. And so how do you, again, advocate in that moment? How do you develop a relationship with the counterparty that is, to the greatest extent possible, mutually beneficial, maintaining trust throughout the process, so that when you come back to the table 3 years from now, you can have the success, because who knows at that moment, Game of Thrones, they have no good shows in 1 year, 3 years from now, they have Game of Thrones and The Sopranos. They're going to say, hey, we can do whatever we want now. And how you treated that
power
company,
is shifting, to your point. Yeah.
It's consistently shifting. And I think, Nick, what was so fascinating during all that experience was, and again, I probably had too many naive moments, but I felt very naive when you started dealing with really large corporations, the significance of the personal relationship. Nick and Bill are having a conversation. Does Nick trust me when I say something, right? You would think these broad institutions are making decisions and everything's database. There's a huge impact or huge 100%. Influence of the personal relationship. And again, that feels naive now, 20 years later, but in the moment, it felt like, gosh, the values you bring to this dynamic, the way you interact with people genuinely impacts the business output, right?
It matters.
If somebody trusts you and they say, Bill, okay, I'm not going to agree to that rep, but you'll be okay, right? I want to be able to trust Nick when you make that sort of characterization. Right. Obviously, you got to consider about your legal obligations and your fiduciary duties. Okay, yes, of course. But that personal connection was so influential in so many of those relationships and those agreements that I think that was a common thread at that point, a little bit of how do you advocate and still focus on connection with people? How do you advocate understanding leverage is going to shift? How do you focus on short-term goals before you try to reshift broader dynamics? So that's kind of at that moment at DIRECTV where, some of that all came together.
Yeah, that's so interesting. That's such an interesting point, because it's not like, I don't know, it's not like Netflix was battling against, Blockbuster. I mean, I guess it was at some level, but it's people making those decisions. And when you're negotiating with the NFL, it's not DIRECTV as some like entity doing it. It's two human beings, two representatives who are actually getting that deal done and getting that stuff negotiated.
Right.
But I mean, I guess it kind of goes back to like the fact that every business is just a people business at the end of the day. It's people buying from people. It's people dealing with people. It's not, these words on a wall or these words on a contract or whatever. Those are maybe the currency that we're using, right, or the tools that we're using to like, quote unquote, ink the relationship. But it is kind of people first and foremost.
It is, and it sounds simplistic in some ways, but it was really a complex concept, right? Because you think about, here's a negotiation of two entities, and you're like, wait a second, there's actually a couple people that greatly influence the outcome, right? And that's a story you start to build out, and it gets into this longer ethics journey, right? Of, okay, how are you showing up in that moment? Who are you? And, what do you represent? And if, my small scope of responsibility in one area basically everyone has that sort of scope of relationship with people, whether it's buying technical equipment or launching satellites or selling something to a customer. Everything at the end of the day is largely going to be driven by, or foundation. The foundation will be in a personal relationship, and it's the start of thing where that idea of how important it is showing up ethically and trustworthiness, because it does really, start driving different and better business outcomes.
So let's, I think in our pre-show call, you talked about this negotiation with the NFL and how, and you use this term of like ethical muscle. Let's talk a little bit about that exact negotiation and kind of the influence that ended up having on you.
Yeah, so the NFL relationship was a massive privilege to be able to work on that relationship, and it was an embodiment of the importance of the trust between us at DIRECTV at the time and the NFL, and the personal engagement. Both companies had a lot invested in the relationship, so there was a lot of time and energy making sure it was a solid relationship. But they were also, high stakes. This was one of the lone differentiators for DIRECTV at the time.
It's a pretty cool innovation, by the way.
It was a lot of fun. It really was. It was a great time for, I think it serviced the NFL in a lot of great ways. And it obviously was massively significant to DIRECTV. And in a field it's hard to differentiate in the cable industry, especially at the time. So this was a really important differentiator. So there was a lot of excitement and engagement, a lot of tension, a lot of advocacy. It wasn't all personal connection. And there was a time, that the story I tell, that it kind of just rose to a semi-tragic, but a pivotal moment in my career trajectory. Was we were negotiating probably one of the last renegotiations I was involved in. It was around the time AT&T had announced its pending acquisition of DIRECTV. And I was on a phone call with a high-ranking employee of the NFL. And, I remember, I'll never forget this call, that we were arguing about data and kind of appropriate, levels of data sharing. And I got a text message at the time, and the text message was informing me that a friend we had been teachers together, who is now a conflict journalist who had done different reporting tours of duties across the world, had been kidnapped by ISIS. A guy by the name of James Foley had been killed by ISIS in a very gruesome public way. And indeed, there was a video of the killing. And that's a hard moment. That is, kind of the last thing in the world you ever expect. I would characterize it as traumatic. And, I'll never forget this individual at the NFL in that moment, because it was literally, you look down at your phone. It's the last thing in the world that you would ever expect to experience. And I talk about it very publicly, intentionally, because I think a lot of people go through horrendous things, right? And this is not a unique experience. This is just my experience. But in that moment, the depth of humanity of my counterparty, and he was a guy I have deep respect for, to try to be present and be thoughtful and kind of, be in that moment for me, just a human that could interact, like put aside, obviously, some of the business dynamics. But there was this incredible exhibition of just empathy and humanity. Of course, that's what we should expect, but I don't know how good we all are at that. And to me, it was, who we are in these moments this was my moment to have something really traumatic. We never know who around us are going through something on that level. And some of us are able to talk about it, some are able to share it, and there's lots of people who don't share it. But kind of having an undercurrent of humanity omnipresent in your professional duties feels like, just at that moment, it was like that. Of course, that's the way we should be. Of course it is. But again, some of these clearly defined. No one sits around at a big corporation and says, hey, let's all be super humane to each other every day. That is not necessarily a talk track. So anyway, that was really, really inspirational to me and influential, and just saying, I got to commit to a level and depth of humanity, or do my best. And I'm sure I'm not great at it some days, but at that moment I said, I got to make sure I'm showing up, because who knows who I work with on any given day is having something similar, in terms of impact in their world.
There's this like German term, Germans have like these long words for like everything you can ever imagine. And it's this term of like, you see somebody walking across the street and you have this realization that they're not some avatar, but they're a person that has all these relationships and all this sort of depth. And I think something weird happens in like the corporate world where we think like we have to show up. This is work, Nick, and I have to leave my, home life at home. But like, to your point, if my God forbid one of my parents die, what am I going to do? Just like leave that in the car? I mean, we're integrated people. We're not like automatons. And it's hard to shut that stuff off. But to your point, when there's KPIs and there's OKRs and there's quarterly earnings and all these like external like pressures, it's hard to keep that stuff in mind, especially when something's super high stakes.
It is. And, I'm fortunate to be a leader and have an organization. And there's this article I often cite, and it talks about effective leadership, and the core of effective leadership really goes to trust, right? Mm-hmm. And if you are in trust with people, largely the idea is you can be an effective leader. And this actually is interesting because it goes back to like effective governments. And there's actually something that there are certain qualities that people exhibit will make your brain more ready to be responsive from a trust perspective. And I say this all the time to people is, you can't put on a mask, in my opinion, you can't put on a mask of leader and be like, hey, I'm going to be Bill the leader today. And everyone's going to look at me and be like, Bill's great. Like everyone, regardless of your profession, regardless of your background, spends most all day engaging with people and assessing and evaluating them as, can I trust that person? Is that somebody I want to get connected with? And there's not like a magic phrase, and there's not a PowerPoint that's going to say, hey, now I'm an effective leader. At the end of the day, I think you need people to trust you. And anyways, this article has 3 core competencies to develop trust with people. One is you need to make logical decisions. And so, if I'm as a leader, you trust me to make, rational decisions. It doesn't mean you like all of them, but if they're logical, and I think a lot of people are okay at that, right? It's, I'm not going to do something wildly unexpected right now. I'm not going to go running off screen. So, okay, you trust me to make a logical decision. The next one is empathy, and empathy is a complex word, and there are different degrees of empathy. There are people that, passive kind of, hey, what's going on? I kind of understand what's going on in Nick's life. And then there's intentional empathy, which is really trying to understand, asking you how you're doing. So there's a continuum. But if you have a basic sense of, okay, what's on your mind? Where are you coming from? A basic sense. Again, people's brain are going to be like, okay, this is somebody that kind of understands at least my situation. So,
or is at least like intentionally trying to understand.
Exactly, and that's why exactly I use that word. The intentionality of it is someone's going to be open-minded. And then the third, and again, this is a way overused word in leadership, assessment, but it's this idea of authenticity. And this is one that it's, there's different levels of privilege and opportunity to be your authentic self, and there's good, thoughtful debate. But I take this very literally, and it's exactly what you were just saying. It's kind of who I am when I show up in, any area in my life.
Right.
People are going to know. People are going to know if it's Bill's trying to be the chief compliance officer today, so he's acting away, or his values, or what he's worried about. And when you said that, if you lose a parent and you show up at work and say, I'm going to leave that in the car, people are going to know, right? They're going to not trust that. They're going to say, wait, there's something that people are super smart, super insightful from a human relationship perspective.
Yeah.
And so they're kind of consistently looking at this idea of, hey, can I trust that person? And I genuinely believe if you try to compartmentalize that stuff too much, if you try to avoid it,
100%.
Obviously it has to be balanced and it has to be professional. Absolutely agree. But so that's been one of the kind of key changes is like, in that moment, I have to talk about that. I think about Jim every single day. I think about him every single day. I think about that moment almost every single day. And so I was like, okay, I'm not going to pretend that that's not it. I'm going to derive learnings from it, try to use it to better myself, better my impact in organizations or whatever. So anyways, I think that point of kind of saying you can't hide it. And I actually think it undermines your leadership when you do. And there's actually science and studies that would support that.
Well, everybody has this sort of negativity bias, right? And so like in the lack of information, we have the propensity to like fill in the gaps in our own mind with negative things. And so to your point, like we're finally attuned to interpersonal like data, and we can always, maybe this is probably self-serving, I guess, but like it feels like our generation is even more attuned to like authenticity. Just look at it from like an advertising perspective. Like we're always trying to, my grandparents used to watch commercials of doctors smoking cigarettes and saying like, Lucky Strikes are the healthiest cigarette. You know what I'm saying? Like, so like we have this sort of, and we've all been to Denny's and seen like a beautiful moons over my hammy, and then we get a plate of slop. So like, we're always trying to find the like authenticity with people. And I think to your point, it does undermine our ultimate impact, right? Like leadership at some degree is some level of influence and impact that's maybe sustainable. But when we're trying to be guarded and we're trying to, put on that facade, people are going to just naturally fill in those gaps with something negative, right? And that's wasted effort.
I tend to agree with that. And people who listen to these, I think sometimes are like, okay, what can I, is there a takeaway for me? And I was lucky to have a mentor who had a very specific tactic on this in terms of the authenticity. And it was really, really good. And effectively what he said was go talk to your family, go talk to your friends, and go talk to your peers, your professional peers, and have them give you one word to describe who you are.
Interesting.
Right? And so you get 10 friends, 10 family members, 10 peers. The more you do it, the better. It's more comprehensive. And you go and you do it. And I remember doing this exercise and it came back, and most people are going to come back with lots of positive words, right? Lots of positive words. And my family was like funny and, loving and soft. And my friends were kind of like loyal. And then work was ambitious, intense, driven. And so I came back and I was feeling really good. And I had all these words and I put them in front of my mentor and I said, he's like, well, what's your reaction? And I was like, listen, it feels really good. It feels like people perceive some good qualities. And he's like, yeah, but don't you see the problem? Like, no. And he's like, do you see the differences between those categories of words? Like which one are you? Right. Because at some point you're not going to be able to pretend that, the joking, laughing, emotional guy at home is not the same guy who's trying to be something else at work. And obviously you got to take out some of the noise, but I use it with mentees now all the time. And the ones who do it authentically, I think extract things from it, right? It's the saying, okay, even though I think I'm showing up as myself, is the perception of how I show up in my most vulnerable moments with friends or family, is that really consistent? Again, you don't want perfect consistency, but you want awareness of the differences of how you are perceived when you're showing up to make sure that you're not losing people's trust over time. Because at some point, those are going to start, the cracks are going to appear. So anyways, it's an exercise I recommend, and I think most people find some value in.
Yeah, that's a phenomenal exercise because you probably start to see some clustering, like you said, and the more overlap, probably the better, or the more overlap is probably more proof that you're like authentically showing up as the same person across these different things,
Right.
So
and you might have strengths with your family that you didn't know that, no one was calling me funny at work, that was not on my list at work, but actually friends and family thought I'm not hysterical funny, but I was. And it was like, wait a second, why are you not? That's a skill that people are picking as their word. Why the heck are you leaving that in those silos and just saying, like, if that's how people are attracted to you or feeling good about you, are there learnings? And then it also fortifies strength. So yeah, highly recommended.
Yeah. And just to kind of bring some of that into like the compliance sphere, all the compliance officers that I talk to who are struggling to like drive influence or power within their organization, they're usually showing up to their neighbors, their friends, their brothers and sisters in a bit of a different way than they are with their counterparts in other departments. And it's like, that's the same. You're the same person. You're the same person outside of work as you are inside of work. And the more we can be that authentic self, like, or put it this way, like anybody who has a relationship with you, Bill, they have a relationship with like the real you, right? Like your best friend, your family, whatever. That connection is kind of connected to the real us. As we put these layers on these facades or these, this carapace that we build up because we've been jaded or we've seen examples from leaders in the, professional organizations that like we've been in. All those things are like stopping points for these like connections that really, in the human to human business that we're all in, kind of prevent us from ultimately being effective in driving more influence and driving more change. You know what I mean?
Exactly. And this is where it all starts kind of converging around this topic of ethics, because how the heck are you going to be influential and shifting an ethical culture if you're not living this to the greatest extent possible? And this is, so from DIRECTV, I went to AT&T, took on some legal responsibilities. And then a couple of years ago, I was asked to be chief compliance officer, which was a real honor. And I remember, doing what I do sometimes. I took out my list and say, okay, how am I going to attack compliance? And I remember talking to some of my peers across other big companies in the country. And, I was expecting, and I called and said, hey, what tool do you use? What training system do you use? What firm do you consult with? And it became very evident very quickly that the people that made the biggest impact on me, for whom I had the most respect, were like, "You're thinking about it wrong." They would say that there has to be a drive on the ethical culture side. And
100%.
that has to be you pushing it. It needs to be the leadership pushing it. It needs to be present. It needs to be genuine. But there is no system, training, protocol, process, investigation,
Right.
AI solution that is going to come even close to matching you being, hopefully, your organization being a spark towards a greater ethical, foundation that's dispersed through the organization. So that was, again, these moments that kind of came and said, okay, how do I go execute? And I have an awesome team on the compliance side, and we're going to go train, and we're going to go have a great enterprise risk management program. We're going to investigate, and we're going to do all those things. And they're like, great, you have to do all those things. But if you're not also simultaneously assessing and figuring out how to impact the ethical culture side, I'm not sure that the long-term sustainability of any of those tactics is really going to be very high. And so that was really, really influential to me, of kind of saying, you got to prioritize the ethical culture side.
Yeah. It's like, if you want to get healthy, it's not like, okay, I need a Peloton or I need some running shoes. It's really going to start with like your true authentic drive to get healthy. And then you're going to start finding opportunities to get more healthy and start to actually utilize that, equipment. When you think about, you've been in this role now for a couple of years. It's a massive organization, multiple businesses underneath the umbrella, and you're trying to be this sort of circulatory system of, creating the circumstances for more ethical behavior, right? Like that's kind of what an authentic culture of integrity is. Where have you felt like your wheels have slipped, or like what are some of the wins that you've had, and what's been surprising beyond just saying, okay, there's not like a silver bullet sort of software or something, but rather it's going to be the kind of, I don't know, the connective tissue that really ends up building it, not the braces that we put on the body that are really going to kind of generate this ideal that you're striving to create.
Yeah. So we're absolutely still on the journey, and it's not as if I came in and was the first person to say, let's have an ethical culture.
Sure.
I think I tried to spend a lot of time prioritizing how that was something that wasn't a compliance organization owned concept, right? That we manifested.
It's everyone's duty or something.
It's something that, and it wasn't like there was resistance to that. People said, of course I care about ethics, but kind of trying to inject it more explicitly, providing more tools to the business, strategizing with different leaders of different segments of the business to just say, how are you excelling from an ethical perspective? And at the same time, it was an easy conversation because every study you look at, McKinsey, Deloitte, they will all say engagement, productivity, cost savings, all of it materially benefit from the creation and sustaining of an ethical culture. Right. So it was really kind of, like you would on a lot of cross-functional initiatives, just saying, hey, how are you thinking about ethics? How can we support what you're doing? How can we extract best practices and then also give you some back? So trying to think about it more collectively. We weren't reinventing the wheel here, but I think we were trying to inject it more consistently and holistically into the dialogue. And then I think what we talked about a little bit before is trying to make sure that we're being opportunistic and highlighting individuals that are inspirational from an ethical perspective. People are motivated when they see really great examples. So we have a ethical recognition program. We just launched a new ethical champion program, which will have people dispersed throughout the company, and they're going to try to be our shining lights. The team's come up with lots of cool ideas. We have a cross-functional team that's an ethical steering committee that's really helping us think about, there's not a compliance-generated concept of ethics. It's how does everyone in every different function, HR, finance, the care centers, how do they think about ethics, and how do we support those initiatives? Because an organization of our size, nearly 140,000 employees, you need that partnership. And honestly, they have better ideas than we often do in terms of how to inspire and drive that. So that's kind of been the key, I think, of it is human element, but then really making sure we're expansive in how we roll it out.
Yeah, and like activating these people in these different fields, or it's not like the only people who care about ethics are in the ethics and compliance department. Just like at that dinner, it's not like the only people who cared about education were teachers. You had doctors there and lawyers and all those kinds of things. And it's like, how do we light those fires, and how do we how do we make it apparent to these different stakeholders in these different departments or these different groups? How do we make it apparent and clear that it's safe for them to like shine that light and that that's valued by the organization? Those are some, it's a really cool thing, you know?
It's super insightful. And the reality is again, you look at the data on this, I mean, the great majority of people want to be in a
100%
stable environment that's ethical and
that they can trust, you know, they can trust the people around them. They can trust what the company's saying, to your point.
Exactly. And we've all been through those situations when you have, you know, you're close to or experience an incident that doesn't feel like it. It's wildly distracting, right? It destabilizes people. It causes them to use a lot of energy in directions that aren't good for the business, right? So I think it's really just trying to elevate it. You know, there's some great companies out there that do a fantastic job of modeling it at the high levels, having cross-functional coordination around it, and then using tactical opportunities to have some programmatic approaches to it. Things like our ethical champions. We do lunch and learns. We try to bring in guest speakers. We have a steering committee to make sure that everyone is consistently giving us feedback of, hey, we need more of this topic in this area. And I think those sorts of things are helping us systemically improve it.
Well, man, we are getting right to the end here. I wish we had some more time. Do you have this, I have two kind of questions. You can pick which either one. But you had this initiative of intentional ethical listening or something. You can, you know, I don't want to like keep you too long, but I'd love to hear a little bit about that. And I also would love to hear like, what's a piece of advice you wish you had when you were younger?
Yeah, I'll try to do both efficiently here. So one of the things that and this is where we're in the early stages of this, Nick, but I think, you know, I've tried to do some thinking about how do people evolve, because I'm genuinely trying to evolve. And I think most of us are not evolved by a system or a process or necessarily a training, or we're usually evolved when we're inspired. And that's usually by people that we've seen. And if you look at kind of key moments in your life, and some of the ones we recounted, there are inspirational moments, and it wasn't a responsibility. It wasn't a leadership title. It was 27 6-year-olds that inspired me, or it was being around certain people in my life that said, gosh, I want to be more like them, or I need to evolve to be better able to serve them. So we're trying to think of ways to inject in this broader systemic approach moments of inspiration. So what we did is recently we brought in for a group of leaders. We mentioned earlier the story of James Foley, my friend, who was tragically killed. And there's this great story. There's a book by an Irish-American author known as Colin McCann. And he wrote a book about Jim's mother. And Jim's mother has kind of taken tragedy and turned to this incredible foundation known as the James Foley Foundation. And it has different goals, super admirable. And she's an incredible woman on multiple levels. And one of the key elements of this book is this instance where the people responsible for James' death, one of the individuals offered as part of his settlement discussions with the federal government to meet with victims' families. There were multiple victims, and the only person of any of the victims' family, is my understanding, that chose to meet with this individual was Diane Foley, Jim's mother. And Colin McCann, in this book called American Mother, writes the story of Diane's choice to sit down with the one of the individuals responsible for James' death and have a conversation with him. And the book captures it better than I ever could. Colin's a brilliant writer. And the first thing she says when she sits down is she says, "I'm here to listen." And it's this really powerful moment. And it was this idea, and it's not going to resonate with everybody, and there's multiple levels of it. But I was trying to emphasize at a time when we don't necessarily as a society do a great job of just sitting down and engaging with people. I was trying to use it as a very stark example of, okay, if Diane Foley can in this moment put aside all the pain and hurt and experience and just try to listen to this individual. And she said the rationale for her choosing to do that was that's what Jim would have wanted her to do. And I always thought that was an incredible moment. And so I just thought that if this inspired somebody when they're about to have a disagreement about politics or sports or tariffs or broader societal initiatives, it just caused them to say, okay, Nick, I don't want to hear anything you have to say, but you know what? I'm just going to genuinely try to listen. And there's this concept of listening of not just, I know what I'm going to say next, really just kind of putting my reaction on pause. And this is the intentional side of listening, is I'm going to work really hard to focus on the words you're going to say. So anyways, that's a program we did. Colin McGann actually has a nonprofit organization known as Narrative 4 that does a lot of training in this area. And so we're just, again, we're in its infancy, but we're trying to do programs of that, like that, where we put a spotlight on inspirational behavior that hopefully contributes to the broader ethical journey. In terms of advice to my younger self, I think it comes back of, we've talked about this, the consistent theme that I see is the focus on and the significance of personal relationships. And, all the training in the world, all the connections in the world, all the ambition in the world, all the goals, it is a very base thing that, when I look back on my 30 plus year career, I look back to the moments of progress and challenge. It was those personal networks and those personal connections and having taken the time to really develop relationships with people, not friends and family, but professionally, just a sense of understanding, a sense of connection. It's amazing to see how those persist. And so when I talk to people, when I talk to our interns, I'm continuously trying to coach them of just saying, as much as you're investing in AI, as much as you're investing in your career choice, are you investing in your personal network? Because time and time again, I'm sure it's been your experience, we all go back to that personal network when we need to make a career pivot, when we need to make a personal pivot, when we need something. And, do you have that same resume of personal network that you do on all those other accolades? Because ultimately, to me, that's a complete game changer in terms of both personal and professional growth.
Yeah. And it's like, we get caught up in this game of like keeping score with dollars or titles or whatever those positions on the resume are. But to your point, the bouquet of our life is not those resumes. It's the relationships that we've built and the impact that we've had on others or that others have had on us. That's actually what shapes us, It's a great reminder. It's great advice.
It's so true, right? Anyone's reflection as they leave a great company or a great job or a great experience. I can't recall a single time someone was like, oh gosh, thank goodness I got that title in 2020. But they will recall, oh, thank God I developed that relation. And again, that's easy to say on this side of it. But if someone really shook me at that time, I think I would have been hopefully even more invested in those relationships over the course of my career.
Well, and to that point, and I swear this is the last thing I'm going to say, but to that point, like if you leave a job that you loved, you're not like, I loved the way my email address looked. I loved the logo on my paycheck. You loved the relationships you had there and the people that built you there and all those kinds of things. And it's like, it's so easy to get caught up in this other game. And the other game is kind of an illusion in a way,
Yep. No, completely.
Awesome.
All right. Well, Nick, it was a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
I really
Sorry to keep you so long, but this was a great conversation. Enjoyed it a lot.
All right. Nick, thanks very much.
Yeah.
All right. Take care.
Bye-bye.